Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 186. Hey, what's going on, everybody? I hope you all had a good Easter, and I hope that your day was spent with as much family as possible, whoever you're quarantined with, or wherever you're still able to see. I hope that you were able to spend your day with the people who matter the most to you. Tonight on the show, we're going to talk about an interview that Bob Weisberg did with the Stanford Law blog. And he is a law professor at Stanford and somebody who is a very, very sharp legal mind. So this was a question and answer session with Robert Weisberg and Sharon Driscoll, and it goes into the charges against Jeffrey Epstein and the way Weisberg saw it playing out and what he thought, in his opinion, would be the situation going forward, as in what charges would be brought, etc., etc. So we're going to jump right into that and see what he has to say. This article was, like I said, at law.stanford.edu. And the question and answer session was Sharon Driscoll asking the questions and Robert Weisberg answering the questions. This article was originally produced July 15th, 2019. Charges were filed against Jeffrey Epstein on Monday, July 15th, accusing the wealthy financier, pedophile, who has links to powerful people, including current and former presidents, of sex trafficking and other crimes. These new charges come a decade after similar charges against Epstein ended in a widely criticized plea deal. Last Friday, criticism of that plea resulted in the resignation of Labor Secretary Alex Acosta, a former federal prosecutor who negotiated the deal. In the discussion that follows, Stanford Law professor Robert Weisberg discusses the Acosta plea deal and the current charges against Epstein. And, it's like I said about Bradley Edwards with the book that he had out, Relentless Pursuit. It's always great to hear from somebody who's on the front lines. And when we want to talk about the charges that are against Epstein, again, to hear from a legal mind such as Bob Weisberg is always a good idea, right? To get a little bit more context and to sort of see what a very sharp legal mind has to say about the charges. Can you explain the new charges filed by Jeffrey Berman in New York? Jeffrey Berman, the head U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, has obtained indictments against Epstein for various offenses involving sex with minors, including charges under the umbrella of interstate trafficking, as well as money laundering and tax crimes involving the money implicated in the trafficking ring. So, folks, right there, that's the RICO case right there for us in a bow, right? This Mr. Weisberg here is giving it to us straight, just telling us the exact charges and what Berman has against Epstein. And remember, now Jeffrey Berman also graduated from the Stanford Law School in 1984. So he is somebody that I'm sure Mr. Weisberg is familiar with. I'm sure he's familiar with Mr. Berman's way of going about things, and I wouldn't be surprised if he has a connect to the office, right? So here are the charges again, including charges under the umbrella of interstate trafficking, RICO, as well as money laundering and tax crimes involving the money implicated in the trafficking ring, which we don't know exactly how much is or where it ended up or where it originated or anything like that. That's where the forensic accountant comes into play, right? And I'm sure that if the FBI is pursuing this kind of case, then they're going to have a legion of forensic accountants and people assisting them to trace this money and where it moved to and from. Was it significant that Epstein was arrested as he came off his private plane in New Jersey? I understand that his Manhattan mansion was searched soon after and evidence uncovered. Well, that's nice, right? It's great and it's fine and well, and I'm glad that the mansion in New York was searched and raided. But what about Zorro Ranch? To this day, it still has not been raided by federal officials, by the federal government, as if nothing occurred there, as if there is nothing to unearth at Zorro Ranch. I mean, it's mind-boggling how that place has not been raided yet. Presumably, the FBI was concerned that Epstein anticipated a search and might destroy or erase evidence. And that's one reason why they went after him while he was out of the country, would be my guess, right? We know that if he was still offered the protection that he was offered throughout his first run, that there is no way that he wouldn't have been tipped off. Somebody would have tipped him off. Computers would have been removed from the house like the Core 4 did. Things would have been removed from the house the way Indike removed things from the house the first time around. So it seems like the FBI was a little smarter this time around, and it's hard for me to give them credit for that, considering how piss poorly they've handled this from the very beginning, and how piss poorly it's still being handled, it would seem on its face. So maybe the FBI learned from the first time around, and without the influence of Epstein's handlers, the FBI pursued it a different way the second time around. The strategy of avoiding this result by first arresting him in New Jersey was perfectly legal, so long as the FBI had probable cause for the arrest. And I think that it's even more than that, considering a lot of his crimes were committed interstate, and they were committed over state lines, so automatically the FBI has jurisdiction and they can get involved in that. So I think there was a lot going on there, obviously, and they definitely had probable cause, there's no doubt about it. But even without that probable cause, staring at them in the face, whatever the probable cause they used to arrest him, they could have had 10 different other charges they could have used to bring Jeffrey Epstein in as well. Incidentally, Epstein soon offered his house as collateral in his bail application, and in any event, this and other assets might later be forfeited to the government, so the government might as well get a chance to enjoy the real estate it may soon own. And yeah, that's true, right? And this is what happens in these kind of cases. If the money is proven bad, they'll seize everything. They'll seize all of your assets. They don't care if it's the house your mother's living in with your 2 brothers who were 3 years old and your sister with special needs. The government will snatch that house right out from underneath you and leave you with nowhere to turn. But when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein, we see that he had different treatment. We see that he was treated a different way than you or I would be treated, or the average person who gets caught up in a RICO case would be treated. Do the new charges include crimes committed in Florida? What about the 2007 case and plea deal? And I know there's a lot of confusion around this portion of the Jeffrey Epstein case about what happened in Florida, double jeopardy, etc., etc. But Mr. Weisberg explains it pretty good here. Even if the old plea deal remained solid, it would not bar new prosecution for crimes that were part of the same pattern of conduct in Florida in the early 2000s, and certainly not for the crimes committed in the same era in New York. So, again, the template is laid out. The blueprint is there. There is zero reason why there aren't prosecutions in this case. There is zero reason why Ghislaine Maxwell has not been arrested, or the Core 4 hasn't been arrested, or where the hell is Jean-Luc Brunel? Why isn't he arrested? There is zero reason for that not to occur, considering the blueprint that was laid out with the Nexium case and what somebody like the lawyer here, Mr. Weisberg, has to say. So, again, the inaction can only be 2 things. 1, the federal government is dragging their feet on purpose because they're building a case. Or 2, they have no desire to ever really go after these people, and they hope if they stall long enough and they act like they're doing something when they're really not, that this case will be forgotten about. And if they think that's going to occur, they are sorely mistaken. Most obviously, so long as new victims have come forward, each victimization counts as a separate case of sex with a minor, so there is no double jeopardy. In addition, new charges involving other statutes like the money laundering and tax offenses and racketeering, aka RICO charges, do not overlap with the original Florida charges in such a way as to be barred by double jeopardy. So there you go again, the second time now Mr. Weisberg has talked about RICO in this interview. He is obviously under the impression that this has all the hallmarks of a RICO case. This highly thought of Stanford Law professor who teaches at the school that Berman graduated from thinks that this is a RICO case. He sees the blueprint here, and he's not even getting down into the weeds about it. He's just giving you the overview. You add all of the information we have up, all the evidence we have, you add all of this stuff up, right? And you understand that the blueprint of the Nexium case is something that they could easily use to set precedent to go after the Epstein organization the same way. And you're left asking yourself, why in the hell are these people still roaming around free? Why was the Acosta plea deal criticized? What do you think was wrong about it? Well, the concern that it was too lenient seems legitimate. Acosta and others seem to acknowledge that they felt overwhelmed by Epstein's team of lawyers and network of rich allies. Think about that, folks. The federal government of the United States. An entity that gets prosecutions in 97% of the cases they bring, they get a jail sentence out of, and Jeffrey Epstein somehow with his high-profile lawyers are able to intimidate the federal government? How come Weinstein's lawyers weren't able to do that? How come Bill Cosby's lawyers weren't able to do that? What did Jeffrey Epstein have that they did not have? Who was protecting him that was not protecting them? That's the question that needs to be asked. An unusual concession for someone representing the United States in a major criminal case, although he says that federal investigators and some of the victims were intimidated and even stalked by Epstein's people. That's not acceptable for a federal prosecutor to use that as an excuse. Acosta had the full weight of the federal government at his fingertips. If he was being followed by Epstein's people, he should have put a stop to it. Okay, don't cry afterwards and say you were intimidated or you were being followed or anything like that. Just admit it, Acosta. You got finessed. You had the screws put to you, and like you told Vicky Ward and like you told the Trump transition team that you were told hands off. Jeffrey Epstein belongs to intelligence. So why don't you just come out and say that, Acosta? Well, probably because he's been threatened as well. You know how these people operate, right? I don't have any evidence of that, obviously, but you know how these people operate. They're not above a good threat here and there to make sure things are moving in the right direction and make sure all the pieces are moving in a synchronized pattern. Everything has to be right. They have to control power at all times. They have to make sure that the narrative is always moving in the direction that they want it to move into, because if the narrative ever fails, and if the public ever truly sees what these people are up to, the game is up, folks. The game is up for these type of people. Acosta's deference to the state prosecutor doesn't make a lot of sense. Federal prosecutors often work out arrangements whereby they will reduce or dismiss federal charges if they are satisfied that the state has dealt justly with the defendant, but they have no obligation to do so, especially where the state case seems so lenient. Again, Acosta should have really eviscerated Epstein. He should have dragged him over the coals. And if it was anybody else, folks, I'm here to tell you, they would have been absolutely eviscerated. Money alone is not enough to get you out of the jam that Jeffrey Epstein was in. The then Palm Beach prosecutor, Barry Krischer, has put the blame on Acosta, but there is plenty of blame to go around. The only officials who look good in this sordid episode are the two Palm Beach police officers who urged Krischer to file major felony charges and gave him lots of evidence. Yeah, there's no doubt. The investigators who were on this case, Ricari and a couple of other people that are slipping my mind right now. Those people were heroes in this case. They were the people that really pushed the state officials and even elevated it to a federal level, which is very detrimental to your career and can have some serious repercussions. So it was very brave for them to do that, and it's absolutely disgusting the way Krischer conducted himself. But Krischer, perhaps deferring to Epstein's local power, even proposed to limit the charge to a misdemeanor and then settled on a single felony count of soliciting prostitution with limited incarceration. And he would have got that misdemeanor too, right? The federal government, to their credit, at least the little iota of credit they deserve, made sure that at the very least Epstein caught a felony and had to register as a sex offender. Talk about small-ass little victories, no doubt about it, but at the very least it wasn't a misdemeanor like Krischer wanted to give him originally. That's just absurd. The whole entire state's prosecutor's office, Villafana, all of them who worked on this case should be ashamed of themselves, and they should all be investigated for wrongdoing. One specific oddity stands out. The deal gave immunity to various potential accomplices, and that's always been a sticking point for me as well. How is it that all of these accomplices that supposedly had nothing to do with the case need this immunity anyway? I thought everybody was innocent. I thought none of this ever happened. I thought everybody was innocent. The core four are just great girls. They would never be involved in anything like this. Jeffrey Epstein was a fantastic guy. Alan Dershowitz kept his underwear on. Prince Andrew was wearing the wrong kit, but he's so honorable he came over to break up with Jeffrey Epstein. Why does anybody need immunity? Everybody should be fine. Everybody's just such an upstanding pillar of the community that nobody should need immunity. But somehow all of them needed it. It is not unusual for a plea deal to include a promise not to charge or go easy on close family members, as where two spouses who have small children are both nationally charged, but a deal protecting non-family possible accomplices is. One wonders if Epstein was bargaining not so much on behalf of protection for his allies, but in effect protection from them, fearing that if charged they would drop any loyalty to him. And he hints at what we're talking about on a regular basis here. Okay, he hints at the people that had loyalty to Epstein, or who Epstein was loyal to. Who do you think those people are, folks? The people from Annie Maid? The people from the local gym? A guy like Jeffrey Epstein that only deals in power and only deals at the levels of society where the rare is rarefied when it comes to how much money you have. You really think that this guy was not being protected by somebody? You really think that this guy was not running around with impunity doing what he was doing because he knew at the levels he was operating at, and the people that were involved, that the people that were protecting him and the people that he had information on were so powerful that he knew he could get away with it? It's obvious that's what he was doing. It's obvious that there were people protecting him, and that's even what Dr. Weisberg here alludes to. Can Acosta's plea deal be overturned? It was criticized by a judge. There is a very unusual legal question here. Normally, a plea deal is very hard to undo after a judge accepts it. A defendant can occasionally undo a plea if she can prove that it was not knowing or voluntary, or that she or he had ineffective assistance of counsel, or that the prosecutor breached a term of the deal. The prosecutor can, in theory, undo a plea if he or she proves the defendant has breached. Here we have a set of victims asking a judge to undo the plea because the original trial judge did not give required notice to victims. This effort, led by Professor Paul Cassell, faces high legal barriers. And we've seen that it definitely faces legal barriers. It's going to be a tough nut to crack. But the battle is not over in that regard yet. They're still trying to get that overturned, and I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up at some Supreme Court somewhere. What about Epstein's employees who are accused of aiding him in committing these crimes? Do you expect them to be charged or become witnesses? If you add to employees various people who did some sort of business with Epstein, there may be a few who will at least be threatened with charges and offer to get their cooperation. My guess is there will be some who will feel no disincentive to testify against him. So he's saying that there's people will definitely be charged, and like I was saying, they'll at the very least be threatened with charges and offer to get their cooperation. So if people on the lower rings of the ladder here get brought in, the idea is to have them roll over on people in leadership positions, roll over on Ghislaine Maxwell, Prince Andrew if they can, whoever might have been in a leadership role. So I thought that this would be a good addition to the catalog, listening to a lawyer kind of put everything together and point everything out and kind of give us an idea of what the charges mean and what Epstein was charged with the second time, and have an actual legal mind give us an idea of what the blueprint was and what the situation was for Jeffrey Epstein and what the law enforcement officials might have had going on as well and what they might have been thinking about as they made this arrest. So again, anytime we can add something from somebody like Weisberg here or Bradley Edwards or one of the survivors themselves, I think it holds a lot more weight than when we hear from just, a journalist or, somebody who's just writing about the story. It always gives you a little bit more context. You get a little bit more of the bigger picture, and you kind of have a better idea of what you're dealing with when you get to hear from somebody who does this for a living or is a professor in, say, law at Stanford, right? Obviously, they have a grasp on what's going on, and they see this sort of thing on a daily basis. So they're able to not only see it, but process it and give some of us who might not have as good of a grip on the law a better idea of what we're looking at from the sense of what the judicial system will see. So with that said, if you want to contact me, you could do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All right, everybody, I'll be back tomorrow with our usual schedule. Until then, hope everybody has a fantastic night.